Hello, this is the brand new Opel Corsa GSi. Now, let me be clear, this isn't an all-new Corsa. In fact, the Corsa is pretty old by now.
However, this does mark the return of the iconic GSi derivative to this country. In the rest of the world, the GSi nameplate mostly means middle-of-the-range performance with lots of spec as standard. But South Africa is unique, as the history of the badge is associated with unruly, wild performance, thanks mostly to the locally developed Superboss from the 80s. There is certainly a weight of expectation here.
So for this new GSi, you will have to pay 365,900 Rand, which is about 30,000 Rand less than the new Polo GTI and about 90,000 Rand less than the Renault Clio F1. And when you compare it to the Polo, I actually think it looks more interesting. I think it looks faster. It's difficult to compare to that Renault Clio because that Clio looks pretty badass actually. But for 90,000 Rand more, I think we can exclude the Clio and just focus on the Polo. So yes, you do pay less for this Corsa. You do get 2 less doors, which is, quite an obvious difference. But in terms of performance, you get quite a lot less too. So where the Polo has a 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder motor, this only has a 1.4-liter. And where the Polo offers 147 kilowatts and 320 newton meters of torque, this only offers 110 and 220. So that's 33% less power and 45% less torque. That's a pretty big difference. But even knowing all of that, even taking all of that into account, I wouldn't describe this car as boring. It certainly doesn't look boring, but it does look like some of it's missing because it just sort of ends suddenly. But this is a really good formula for a hot hatch. It rides on 18-inch wheels as standard with Michelin Pilot Sport tires. Those are very nice, but they're not going to be cheap to replace. But look how far into the corners the wheels are pushed. There's very little front and rear overhang, very little weight on either side of the axles. That's a very good thing. And what is also a very good thing is the fact that it only has 2 doors, because in the world of performance cars, 2 doors are always better than 4. Now, car engineers will tell you that their biggest pain in their lives are doors. If everyone could just get into their car through the roof, that would make them a lot happier. Because as soon as you cut a big fat hole in the bodywork, you get flex in the chassis. And that's what you're trying to get rid of in a performance car. You want as stiff a chassis as possible, so it's the best possible platform for the suspension to run on. A chassis that flexes almost acts like an unpredictable 5th spring in your setup. And that's the thing about a 2-door car, it's just inherently stiffer. So not only is this car lighter than the Polo by 130 kilograms, it definitely feels a lot stiffer. You notice it as soon as you go into your first corner. And what that means is it feels very predictable, very adjustable. It feels like it sinks its claws into the road. And that's thanks to a slightly different suspension setup for this GSi model. It is very stiff. This is less of an everyday car than the Polo is. In fact, this is actually pretty shit over rough road surfaces. But when the going is smooth, you can absolutely chuck this thing around. It really is good fun. The rear end is livelier, the front end is bitier. This is just a much more engaging drive than a car like the Volkswagen Polo. And it's really got that going for it. But what it doesn't really have going for it is that enormous lack of power I mentioned earlier. But Opel have been quite clever about the mapping in this car. And it has some slightly weird characteristics. So for instance, in first gear, not much there, not that exciting, no torque steer at all. But in second and third, this is where the entire party is happening. So it's a bit more of a momentum car, a little bit like a go-kart. You got to sort of get it going to get the most out of it. But once you are going, and if you're throwing it into some tight and twisty corners, you can just hop between second and third gear and absolutely ring this thing all the way to the 6,500 RPM red line. and then the chassis starts to come alive. Then you're getting the best out of the engine. It actually becomes pretty fun to drive. Wasn't expecting that.
The interior is a real highlight and packed full of features, all included in the purchase price. The leather Recaro seats look the business, and they're comfortable and very supportive. The infotainment system looks a bit dated, but it actually is comprehensive and has new tech such as Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. There are also such niceties as heated seats, park distance control, and even a heated steering wheel, all fitted as standard. For all these extras in any of its competitors, you'd almost certainly have to fork out a lot more of your money.
This little GSi is a good car. It's an enjoyable car. But that GSI, those 3 letters, have so much nostalgia attached to them in South Africa. And I think if you're going to go ahead and stick that badge on the back of a car, it needs to be a little bit wild. It needs to have the performance to match the looks. I remember I drove the Corsa OPC a long time ago, previous generation, and that thing was mad. It was like the motoring equivalent of a honey badger. It just wanted to go around fighting with everything, torque steer all over the place. But this is the thing, I drove it, 10 years ago, and I'm still talking about it. I can still remember the experience really vividly. And that's why I think this car is a little bit of a missed opportunity. As nice as it is, it's a bit forgettable. And I really, really wish it wasn't. Hello and welcome to the end card. Let me quickly take you through how it works. Over here, some more videos for you to enjoy. This little blocky up here will take you straight to Cars.co.za, and this button over here will let you subscribe to our channel. Off you go.